What can we expect from the Rugby Championship teams if we look at what their Super Rugby teams have done throughout the season? I've had a look, compared the 5 New Zealand teams, 4 South African and Australian teams, and the 1 Argentinian team. I've compiled their stats on various areas to see if there are any kind of common themes, any particular strengths across the teams or weaknesses, and how well or will this flow through into what we see from these teams in the Rugby Championships. Does this give us any indication of where each country is particularly strong or weak? I've had a look at 5 areas, so attack, defense, kicking, set piece, and discipline. Discipline also includes a bit of, like reliability, but I've combined them into one group. So we'll have a look at these 5 areas, see with the combined stats where these teams lie, and do you think this marries up with what we will likely see from their national teams? So if we're looking at attack, I'm looking at the number of points scored per game, tries, run meters, how often they get over the advantage line, how often do they go 7+ phases in attack, line breaks, tackle busts, offloads I've included in attack as well, and also pick and drives. So all the countries seem to have particular stats that they're good at. Like, for example, points scored. The Jaguar is actually top, and this is only across the regular season. So I've cut the stats off at the playoffs because not all the teams made the playoffs, obviously. So the Jaguars across the regular season had 28.8 as their average number of points scored per game. New Zealand teams were at 28, Australian teams 24, and then South African teams 23. So that's the ranked order. But then if you look at tries, it's New Zealand teams, run meters, New Zealand teams. How often do they get over the advantage line? It's the South African teams who average the best there. Actually, that one has nothing for the Aussie teams as the number 1. Could be perhaps telling. I also didn't include the Sunwolves in any of these stats, just FYI. Offloads was New Zealand. Pick and drives also New Zealand. Tackle busts New Zealand. Line breaks is New Zealand. 7+ phases is New Zealand. So New Zealand topped the stats in attack. And when I average them out, New Zealand teams, in terms of their attacking numbers, actually come up really good. So they're the most likely to do all of those things that I just mentioned, with the South Africans second by quite some way, the Australians marginally behind the South Africans, and then the Argentinians quite some steps back again. So well last, which is kind of funny if you think about it, because they were the number 1 team with points. So I guess that shows it doesn't necessarily have to rely on tackle busts, offloads, and line breaks to be getting points, depending on the style that you play. Let's have a look at defense. I'm looking at points conceded, tries conceded, penalty goals conceded, tackles, also missed tackles, so one's kind of a positive stat, one's a negative stat, run meters conceded, advantage line conceded, and line breaks conceded. So most of these stats are negative, not ones that you want to be scoring highly in. Argentina were the number 1 team in terms of their average points conceded. It was only 22. The New Zealand teams were second with 23.6. South Africans were 24.2, and the Australians 26.3. But if you look at penalty goals conceded, the Aussie teams were the best, with the Jaguars being the worst. Tackles, the New Zealand teams made the most. Missed tackles, the New Zealand teams missed the fewest. It was the Australian teams who missed the most. Run meters conceded, that's the South Africans that concede the fewest there. The New Zealand teams actually concede the most. And part of me thinking about this is, if the New Zealand teams all have really good attacking stats and they play each other more often, yeah, it's going to affect their defensive stats as well. The New Zealand teams are pretty good at holding the advantage line, which seems strange seeing as they concede the most run meters, but I suppose if one guy's getting 80 meters in one run, that'll do that to you. And the Aussies were the best with conceding line breaks, which again seems strange, seeing as some of their other stats like missed tackles were pretty poor. But across all these stats, it's actually the South African teams who have the best kind of overall averages in terms of their defensive numbers. The Jaguares second, the Aussies third, and the New Zealanders across the board, despite the fact that they make the most tackles and miss the fewest tackles, other areas don't go their way very well, so they are ranked defensively the worst. But again, that perhaps ties in with the fact that they're playing teams who attack well more. At least attack well in terms of those key stats. As I said, there's more than one way to attack. So you got New Zealand heading attack, South Africa heading defence. If we look at kicking, I'm looking at points again, but that's only kicking points. Conversions attempted, penalty goals attempted, goal kicking percentage, drop goals attempted, drop goal kicking percentage, kicks, and kick meters. Interestingly for this one, the New Zealand teams topped the conversion rates because I guess their team scored the most average number of tries, so that makes sense. But if you look at goal kicking percentage, New Zealand are pretty much last equal with Argentina or the Jaguares. The South Africans top the goal kicking percentage with Australia 74, South Africa 79. New Zealand's like 72.6 and Argentina's 72, so just 0.6 in between those two teams. Those New Zealand teams and the Jaguares. There haven't been many drop goals attempted, but the Aussies have the best rate at 50%. The South Africans were 1-4, and the Jaguares and Kiwi teams did not manage to successfully convert any drop goals, although they did attempt some during the season. Average number of kick meters, and now here's where the Argentinians really come into play. 731 was the kicking meters. I forget if it was an average or of a total. Either way, their number is the biggest. Forgive me, there's a lot of numbers on this page. Their numbers are 731. If you look at South Africa, it's 595, Australia 588, and New Zealand 578. Bear with me a second, that's going to bother me. Yeah, I thought I'd better check if that's actually per game. That's per game. That's a lot of kick meters, man. I knew they kicked the ball a lot. I mean, the Jaguares kicked 24 times per game compared to everyone else's 19 point something. Literally 19 point something. There's not much between the others at all. The Jaguares kicked markedly more than everybody else. And this is perhaps how they're able to get down that end of the field to score those points without necessarily relying on tackle busts, line breaks, and all that jazz. So, yeah, the Jaguares, far and away, apart from their goal kicking percentage, doing very good things with the boot. The Australian second, the South Africans third, despite having the highest goal kicking percentage in terms of round the park stuff, not as high. And the New Zealanders last with their work they're doing with the boot. Set piece. So we've already got New Zealand as the best for attack, South Africa for defence, Argentina for kicking. Set piece. Who's your guess? Interestingly, I'm looking at scrum wins, scrum win percentage, tight heads, line-out wins, line-out win percentage, and line-out wins on the opponent's throw. It's actually the Aussies. And that's one area that, especially at scrum time, the Aussie teams get criticised. I suppose on the back of the Brumbies' good scrum, and I know the Rebels had a remarkably good line-out. Like their line-out win percentage is 91.5 across the four Aussie teams. The next best is 90 with the Jaguares. The New Zealand teams are at 86.6. So a fair bit lower. The Aussie teams win the most lineouts per game. Their scrums are the second best, kind of behind the... they're actually the best. 99.5 against 99.4. Best scrums in the game. Winning lineouts off the opponents, though, is actually the Jaguares. I mean, Guido Petti is kind of a master at that. Tight heads is the New Zealand teams. The Jaguares really suffer with the scrum stats. Their scrum stats do not look good at all. Their number of scrum wins per game is 3.6 compared to everyone else who's 4, 5, and 6. Their scrum win percentage is 96%. But that's a stat which is often a bit deceiving. I don't think their scrum is as good as all that. To be fair, they conceded a lot of scrum penalties throughout the season. But yeah, overall across the set piece, it's the Aussies first, the South Africans second, the Kiwis third, and the Jaguares, so the Argentinians, fourth. So you've got each area having having one country is the best. The fact that New Zealand is best at attack would kind of go with the stereotype. The South African defence, if you look at their win over the All Blacks last year, tends to reflect that. The Argentinian kicking game, I suppose it's going to be interesting to see how they go with Nico Sanchez compared to Bonija Miotti for the Pumas. Set piece, I'm still not committed on that one, despite the fact that I'm wearing a Wallabies jersey and I'm not trying to throw shade at the Aussies. But I can't see the Aussie scrum dominating the All Blacks or the box. I could be mistaken. Their lineout has been remarkably good, so we'll see if that's able to keep up those good numbers as well. I guess it depends how Cheika goes, if he picks the Waratahs guys or the Reds guys. I mean, if you actually think about it, the Reds are a fairly strong set-piece team, likewise the Brumbies. So that probably translates to a bit of some of the success. The Crusaders have been rotating a lot of their props a lot, likewise the Chiefs, so perhaps that's part of the reason some of these stats are the way they are. There's always the initial story, but then there's always more to it than just the numbers. Lastly, I better move on to discipline before this video gets too long. Penalties won, penalties conceded, free kicks conceded, sin binnings, red cards, errors, which is going into that kind of reliability territory, not just discipline, but also turnovers, like turnovers conceded, and ruck and maul penalties forced. So that one's a positive stat compared to the previous one. It's not turnovers won, it's turnovers conceded. And this area, the New Zealand teams actually do pretty well. They're the best for conceding free kicks in that they don't have that many. The best for sin binnings in that they don't have that many. Their error rate is the second best behind the Aussie teams. Their turnover rate is also, well, it's the third best behind the Aussies and the Argentinians. Their ruck and maul penalties forced is the number one, better than the other teams. Penalties won and penalties conceded is kind of middling. So, yeah, it's the New Zealand teams who get there. The Jaguares are the losers with that one. Part of that will be their scrum penalties conceded, because they did concede quite a few. The main areas they suffer is they are not the top team. They're actually last on ruck and maul penalties forced. They are the number 2 team for the amount of errors they concede or they cough up. They are the highest average alongside the Aussie teams with sin binnings. Free kicks conceded, they are the number 1. Penalties conceded, they are the number 1. So number 1, not in a good way. For that, it was the South Africans who were in third, and the Australians were second best behind the Kiwis. So it's an interesting spread overall to have different teams good at different areas. I mean, as I said, kind of some of it goes with the stereotypes, but I'm not sure about all of it. I guess we do have to wait and see how things go in terms of selections with the squads. What kind of squads will they go for? I can't imagine the All Blacks having much problem at set-piece time, although I will knock on a bit of wood for that, because anything can happen in sports. Hopefully the Aussies can shore up what they're doing. Likewise, the Jaguares and the Pumas will need to get their scrum right, because it has been an area of concern for them. I feel like their discipline stats are really directly affected by the number of penalties they conceded at scrum time. I would like to see, don't have the data available, but what percentage of their penalties conceded were at scrum time, because I feel like it's probably too many. The Wallabies to dominate the set piece at the Rugby Championship seems unlikely at this point, but as I said, if I pick my paper back up off the floor, there's no team that did tragically bad at everything. I mean, I guess all the conferences had teams that were strong and weak at particular things, even within the same conference. But yeah, kicking for Argentina, defense for South Africa, set piece for Australia, and attack and discipline for New Zealand. How well does that ring true to you? You guys let me know your thoughts. Please remember, it is only based on the regular season for Super Rugby. It doesn't include any of the playoff stuff. But yeah, we'll await the Rugby Championship, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.